First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful country, and the festival is so impressive. The cast of characters is wonderful, and the Colombians I've met are absolutely brilliant and generous, so wanted to start there. So the idea of being a University of the Imagination really suggests that we need to be brave, take risks, understand and analyze our world, but also be able to think creatively in using tools that are actually methods to solve problems. So my university has a fundamental commitment to being very interdisciplinary, but from the lens of art and design. And we say that we take on the problems of the world that we are within. But we use methods like design thinking, where we understand the context of users, and then we think about how we can work with them very closely to, with them, facilitate and imagine a solution. We use a lot of experimental techniques that use the body, and the body is an amazing vehicle for expression of knowledge that we've internalized. We are using a lot of methods from indigenous knowledge that look at sort of the world as having different influences that we can think about almost in a seasonal way, in a way that looks at the different cycles of life. In order to say how can we shape imaginations as a form of discipline. So we now say imagination with impact. So we're the University of the Imagination, but it's imagination with impact, because so many problems in our world require solutions that are not evident, that are not the ways that we've acted in the past. And you need designers, and you need artists, because artists will think very laterally. They'll think outside the box, and designers will think very empathetically to be able to really find ways for us to move forward. So maybe the underlying theme of my talk was about data fluency, and this is a new idea. It's an idea that isn't about literacy, isn't about numeracy. It's not saying you lack an ability. It's saying we need this capacity in a world where we're saturated by data, where our data is collected every second and in every way, to be able to understand how that data is being collected, what it is composed of, how it's structured, who has access to it, and then how it is analyzed. So data fluency and democracy are very, very closely tied. So my argument is that data is this fantastic material that we have to analyze and understand. And then when we visualize it, or we sonify it, because sound is important, for example, with people who cannot see, that we need to find ways of making those images meaningful, accessible, and give people the tools to use those representations to make decisions in their lives. And then when we analyze data, we need to be able to create different kinds of options in that analysis. So in the beginning of the talk, I gave examples of representing the same data set in very different ways, because we need to understand when an economist or a government says, this is the story, this is the result of this data, we need to be able to question that data set. We need to be able to see different ways of showing it and ask for those kinds of images. So that's one of the pieces that's really important, and designers are incredibly important in terms of how we work with data, how we make it meaningful. And inclusive design is a particular set of disciplines that look at social inclusion, the inclusion of people with disabilities, being able to, in this world where increasingly there's elites who manage data and represent data, and people who don't have access, inclusive design says, let's find strategies to make sure that we use data in ways that make the world more equitable, more inclusive, but also where we promote that ability to interpret and understand data. we're in a moment right now where there's a kind of reaction against the big data corporations, and some of that is legitimate because of the ways that data has been collected, manipulated, and used to control essentially behavioral economics. We've seen that in elections and other contexts. But in many ways, those companies also provide tools that we need to be able to access and, in a sense, seize. And then we need to be able to create our own technologies and tools, some of which are open source, to be able to, create that access to data for people to make decisions in their lives. Urban planning, incredibly important. When you think about Mansalles and the opportunities here, if people have access to data, they can help governments make smart decisions. So there's many examples where I think people don't see that connection between data and democracy, but we're beginning to see the failures of democracy when we don't have access to data and we don't have a say in how our data is used. So this is a major challenge to first of all educate all of us to understand that no technology is neutral. So technologies are constructed through cultures of science and technology. They're constructed by certain kinds of people often who have a certain kind of education. That's part of why designers should not just be creating the end product, but they should be disruptors in many ways within that process of design, where we ask the right questions and we help to create technologies in ways where we acknowledge who the technology is made for and how it's made. So algorithms are just a component of this. I mean, algorithms are mathematical, and yet we've chosen which mathematical solutions we have focused on over many, many years of development. And artificial intelligence is just one of those areas where we started building systems that supported human decision making, that were efficient, that were tools to support us. We've moved more and more in trying to represent accurately how human thinking and cognition occurs. And part of my talk was to challenge that and to say, maybe we do need to look at these intelligences as other and different, and then think about how we imagine those when we think about nature, natural phenomena, for example. But algorithms are constructed. And I talked a little bit about the ways that there's algorithmic bias, which is when the kinds of data that are fed algorithms and are used to train algorithms mean that they absorbed, for example, stereotypes about race, gender assumptions, ways of privileging certain communities in planning. And there's many, many, many examples, and the book that you're referring to, in fact, gives those examples. And so we need to think about algorithms that counter those practices, that also think differently about the kind of data sets that we curate and choose. But it's an ongoing challenge, and the only way to manage it is through looking at the algorithm almost through a sort of semiotic and a science of technology lens, where we look at it as a construct. And I gave some ideas about how to do that. Catherine Githesworth, for example, where she's showing you how the algorithm works through visualization. I think that's really exciting work. Well, to fight for open data and public repositories of data. I'm involved with Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, who are very connected to Alphabet, and I'm actually one of the people who's continuing to support their work, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for inclusive design and looking at automatic vehicles and really good urban planning using those tools. But I've also been one of the people that's fought very hard for them to create an open repository of data that's stripped of people's identities and is controlled by a public entity, not by Google, not by Alphabet, and where there's gateways to access that data so we can undertake different kinds of analyses of that data. And there's a lot of tools out there to do that work. I think this is one of the most fundamental problems or challenges of our time. It's something that I've had decades of commitment to. I think part of it is ensuring that Indigenous people have access to education, that they can preserve their own languages, that they can educate and learn within their own cultures and preserve and look at the continuity of those cultures into the future. I gave some examples of that. It's also, for sure, having access to every level of education, including post-secondary education. It's ensuring that all of our institutions hire Indigenous people and that they're part of our culture, but that we change our institutions to be more reflective of those cultures. It's protecting the fundamental rights to land, to water, to hunting rights, fishing rights, so that ability to have a land base as well as an urban base is incredibly important because cultures are local and practices are local. I think it's respecting and learning from the fundamental belief in an integrated ecological environment that is the earth, which almost every Indigenous culture, wherever you go, has that commitment because of its sense of the local, as well as the sense of being connected and networked. So I think these cultures are transformative if we partner with them. And I think they're very threatening to others because they carry a kind of set of values which is often in contradiction to values of exploitation without critique. So, we're in a complex moment with the earth. We need to continue to develop technologies without question, and Indigenous people, as I said in my lecture, have invented technologies for millennia, and some of the most interesting technology creators in my country are Indigenous right now. So, we'll see where those ideas go, and there's a lot of opportunity for that Indigenous imagination and Indigenous futurism to paint a different and a better world. I have seldom been treated better. It's incredible. We're all talking about that, it's just amazing. The people are wonderful. Felipe is a legend, so it's wonderful to meet him. Adriana is amazing. They've just been supportive and welcoming, and I spent part of the morning and then the afternoon at the PhD colloquium, and I was really impressed by the presentations and the posters and the quality of thinking within the doctoral students. And then this is a reunion for me, so I'm impressed by the programming and by the warmth, and the food is fantastic.